Providing insights to help you grow your business, improve yourself, and add value to those around you. You're listening to the Success is a Choice podcast, where you get a peek into the lives of industry leaders as they share their stories with you.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Success is a Choice podcast. I'm your host, Jamy Bechler, and we appreciate everybody checking this out on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Rumble. Maybe you're listening to this on your favorite platform of audio podcasts. We will get to our guests in just a moment, but first I want to remind you that this episode is made possible by the leadershipplaybook.com. Have better teammates, more positive leaders, and stronger culture at the leadershipplaybook.com. Great teams have great teammates, and one of the best ways to get that is by helping develop them and train them. And so use coupon code CHOICE, as in success is a choice, and you can receive 25% off. So the leadershipplaybook.com. Well, today's guest is the director of athletic performance at Metrolina Christian Academy down in North Carolina. He's a consultant for SimpliFaster. He's a former longtime both college and high school coach. We want to welcome into the show Mark Hoover today. Mark, welcome.
Thanks, Jamie. I really appreciate you having me on. It's very humbling for sure.
Well, we appreciate having you on. You know, you do a lot of work in the strength and conditioning area. You speak at all kinds of clinics and stuff. You have a great Twitter account, Twitter stream on social media for strength coaches and stuff. And you can find him at Mark Hoover 71 at Mark Hoover 71 if you want to check that out on Twitter. Let's get into it. I want to hit right from the start. All right. Strength and conditioning. We think strength and conditioning coaches. What is a mistake that people make when they think of strength and conditioning, or we're going to build muscle for this sports? We're just going to go in and we're just going to hit the bench press. We're going to hit the squats, and all of a sudden we're going to perform well. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say that's probably the biggest misconception. I think one of the things we fight at the high school level with parents, I think, don't quite understand it is that they think this is weightlifting class. And, you know, that might be the case in some situations. Different high schools have different things going on, but, you know, at the schools that are blessed enough to actually have a spot for a qualified, you know, some strength conditioning position, performance position, where that's the person's actual job and that's their livelihood. That is definitely not the case. You know, I think people are like, well, they can just squat after school. You know, they can just bench at the gym. But, you know, what they get from us is not something that they can get on their own. And if they did, they would be paying lots and lots of money for it, because there's many, many, many great private facilities. But, you know, they get us for free. And I think sometimes, you know, people that aren't in the field kind of have that misconception that we're just the weightlifting person.
So there's probably a ton of myths, and you could poke holes in all of these. And, you know, especially us parents or old school parents, you know, we might have no idea about really weightlifting. You know, if you're a basketball player, oh, it's going to mess up your shot. Or if you're a girl, it's going to make you look like a boy. You know, you're going to get all bulky and stuff. Tell us some of your favorite myths, or burst some of those myths that are out there that we might have about strength training.
Well, I think, you know, basketball is a good one, and you're a basketball guy. So I think that is one of those things that people think, and you know, that might be the case if you don't shoot year round, you know, or if you don't lift or train year round. If you're training, then, you know, you're not going to have you're training in a smart way, you are not going to have soreness, or it's not going to throw off your shot. To tie those two skills together, it as long as you're continuing to practice that skill while you're growing and maturing, I would think especially with high school kids, they're going to grow and mature whether they, are lifting weights or not. That's the easiest. That's part of the problem with strength and conditioning is everyone thinks that they're qualified to do this because their high school kids get stronger, and they would get stronger even if they didn't walk in the weight room. So, and that's a whole nother story. But just saying, from a basketball shot or a swing or they're going to grow anyway. Be smart about it. Train year round. If you don't want those issues to come up, train year round. And then, people are like, I can't believe you do this stuff on game day. And, it's a little bit different what we do on game day and in season, but when we train, but here's the thing, those guys and girls train year round. So it's not like we're adding any new stimulus, really. It's just, and that's where you get in trouble. If you start adding a bunch of new stimulus, then yeah, you're probably going to have a negative effect. But if you're smart about it and train year round, those kind of things. And it's funny, I really thought that girls shouldn't lift because they'll get bulky was kind of in the past, just because, you tend to surround yourself with like-minded people as far as but I think it's still out there. And, what I tell our girls and is you probably don't have the hormones to get too bulky. Like, it's not going to you're not just going to lift weights and all of a sudden be bulky, and it's kind of crazy because my daughter is pretty thick and she, as far as muscular wise and depending on if she was in season for soccer, she'd be a little bit leaner, and then off season. And she came off of COVID looking like she was ready to compete in a competition, because she didn't play soccer. But I tell them, that's not going to be the norm, because she just is genetically, I'm a genetically large human being. And that's just, the average female, and most females, they're not going to be bulky, and you just don't have the things you see on TV are probably a little bit different than reality as far as when you look at like female bodybuilding and stuff. So I would really love to crush that one, because that's definitely a complete myth. And I think that's a dangerous one, because I think one like real low hanging branch for a female athlete is to develop strength and in all different planes and be able to move in strong ways. Its strength isn't necessarily, strength is task specific, the squats and those things, those are generally, but that's not the only way we're developing strength. And I think that's a low hanging fruit for female. With football, baseball is getting a lot better. Basketball, it's kind of, with the men's sports, under football, there's no question they're going to train. They understand it. I think for a female athlete, she can set herself apart, a team apart, by taking part in a well-rounded, holistic, athletic performance program, and without the fear of being bulky. There's very little chance of them training 3 days a week or whatever and eating their normal diet, which is probably deficient anyway, all of a sudden just blowing up, so.
And you kind of make a good point, or you talk about, or when we talk about bulking up, I remember when I was a high school athlete, basketball player, that was my number one sport. And I remember before a game once, I went and did like this whole workout session because I knew there was going to be a lot of people at this game. It was going to be a packed gym, and I wanted to look good.
Yeah.
I wanted to look ripped, get that little pump in before the game, which was really stupid. I went 0 for 8 from 3-point. It ended up being our only conference loss of the year. And my coach was not happy with me. But I say that because oftentimes we think, I think we get this misconception that it's about how we look.
Right.
We were, I wanted to look pumped I wanted to look ripped or whatever in my uniform. But going back to the girl thing, the female thing, they're worried about how they'll look, or they worry that they'll get too bulky. Well, that's not really what athletic performance and strength training is about. It's not about how you look. It's about how you perform.
That's so true. And I mean, so I have a good buddy, trains guys for the NFL Combine. He's one of the Tony Vellani down in Florida, and he's one of the most successful ones at it. But we were talking one day, and he brought up that point that you look at the guys getting ready for the draft, their bodies are going to look completely different than a 5-year veteran. And he showed me a picture of one of his guys that come in for the draft, and he really did look. He was ripped, abs. 5 years later, he's on his second contract, and he just looks. I mean, he's still he looks athletic, but he doesn't look like a bodybuilder. He looks like an athlete. He looks like a way an outside linebacker probably should look. They don't. I mean, if they have abs, great, but there's no. And he said that, that's the dog and pony show of it. They have to look a certain way, but as soon as they start actually training to play football, a lot of that changes, and so yeah, I think it's always nice, if that's what you want, I guess, you can shoot for that, but that's not necessarily an outcome, of that we're seeking, is how we look, just more about how we perform.
How you perform, injury prevention. And
Yeah.
and that's where not necessarily if you go into a weight room, or you go into your local YMCA and you see somebody over in the corner using, different balance balls or medicine balls or doing tennis ball drills or doing things like that. It's not that they're necessarily becoming better performant or better, training for performance, but, just hitting the bench press and hitting the squat rack, that might not, or, doing the curls, for the beach, that doesn't necessarily make you a better performer. Sometimes you do have to break it down and work on some balance stuff and work on some functional strength as opposed to just, what you max out at.
Yeah. I don't know why this is so debated, but it is. I have my theories why, but particularly at the high school level, strength is so task specific. That squat rack, people get offended, but it's not really, you're not saying squats aren't important. What you're saying is there's no squat rack on the football field, on the basketball court. And that's what I told our athletes in MCA when I said, look, I don't want to hear about your 1 rep max because I don't care. We have technology that makes that, redundant. I don't need to have you go through a 1 rep max, because here's the thing. I don't want our athletes chasing that extra 5 or 10 pounds and doing it poorly, thinking that that's going to help them become a better athlete, because it's not. That, they need to get to a certain level of strength, and that's really individual and dependent on the needs analysis of your athletes. But to chase that 5 or 10 pounds thinking that, well, we got to do it because I'm going to be better at basketball. Well, if they decide overtime with a squat contest, well, that's what we'll chase, those 5 or 10 pounds. But until then, like at the coin flip, you don't start, like, they don't say, hey, we're going to flip this coin. And then after we decide who's going to get the ball first, we're going to go and do a bench contest. And whoever has the highest bench gets 7 points on the board before the game starts. I'll worry about that 1 rep max then, because that's general. There's so many other things that you need to worry about, because you've got, well, look, for me, I had no skill. I was big and strong, and when I walked on, and you and I don't know if we said this on the air, but you and I were teammates and lived in the same dorm and went to the same college. When I walked on campus, the coaches were all over me, like, look at this guy. He's 6'4", he's 285 pounds. We go in the weight room and I'm squatting the house and I'm benching, and then after they see me play, they're kind of like, like, and, and so that's just so many times that you put that emphasis on that 1 rep max, thinking that's going to make them a better athlete. It may not work out. It is just, I want to focus on more specific strengths. And I think that's one of the things that people don't quite get sometimes.
So you are a consultant for SimpliFaster. What are some of the things that SimpliFaster is doing And what are some of the things that you do with them to help strength programs or coaches all across the country be a little bit better?
And SimpliFaster is just a fabulous company. I started just writing articles for them, and then they started to have me do some product, like they'd send me a VBT device and I'd test it. And, and then one day they just, after 4 years of that, they just kind of called up and said, hey, what would it take for us to get you full time? And so that's kind of how I got on board. But it's a sports technology company. I mean, they sell, so they've got the technology side and the educational side. On the technology side, they're selling all of different technologies, velocity-based training. I mean, everything, the force plates, you name it, it's in there. And then on the educational side, they have a blog and classes and things that are free. And essentially what I do is whatever they kind of need me to do. If they need me, I spend a lot of my time helping coaches use that technology. So they'll buy it. And the nice thing about SimpliFaster is they're like, help everybody. I mean, if they call and say, hey, I'm using a different product, so they send me those products too. So I'm able to help people, whether it's a SimpliFaster product or not. So I spend a lot of my time on the phone with coaches, and that is absolutely awesome. And then if they need me to consult on a device, they'll call me in and we'll get them to jump on a call, or they'll send me something. They send me to clinics, and I talk to coaches. So really my job is just meet people, build relationships, and talk to coaches, and it's fabulous.
So you talk with coaches. You were a coach yourself, a long time. You coached both at the college and the high school ranks. You were a head coach for a decade or so. What are some qualities? Can you kind of look at a coach and say, hey, that coach is probably a pretty good coach? I think they would probably be good no matter what school they were at. Are there some certain qualities that you see across the board, or ways to tell if a coach is going to be a pretty good coach?
Well, I would say yes. It comes down to, I think you look at them and you just kind of get their attention to detail. I think sometimes people are great coaches working with great athletes and winning games. And sometimes people are probably pretty average coaches working with great athletes and winning games, because it really does come down to that. And what I found, I always just happened to be in a situation where, when I was coaching, when I was assistant, I was an assistant in a lot of winning programs, and luckily with coaches that were detail-oriented. But as a head coach, I always seemed to come into a school that's like, yeah, we won one game last year and we don't have any players, but and then we would kind of turn it around to the point where we were doing okay. And I think that process sometimes teaches you an attention to detail, because you have to be better at the little things. You can't just say, I tell people all the time, I had a good buddy that I brought in. We did a wing tee clinic like 25 years ago. And I've lost track of him now, but we were wing tee buddies back then. And he came in and he was at a private school in Pennsylvania where they recruited kids. And, the first thing he said when he went to talk to the coaches, he said, look, I'm going to tell you all the plays that we run and how we run it. He said, but I'm going to tell you this. It doesn't really make any difference what plays we call, when we call them, because we have Division I athlete in almost every position and our opponents don't. And he's like, he goes, I think I'm a pretty good coach, but I don't really know, because it's just get the ball to the guy that's going to outrun everybody. He was a joke, but he was humble about that. And I think sometimes that's the truth. So I think you can watch the relationships that coaches build. Are the players hanging around the office? Are the players wanting to talk, joking around, and in the time that there's times to joke, how those relationships are? I think watch how other coaches gravitate to them, and how they handle those relationships. But I think it really, as everything, it comes down to relationship building. If you can build relationships, you're gonna multiply your force. That's a force multiplier using, I guess, is that a military term, I guess, but it really is. If you can get somehow those coaches that get the whole to be better than the individual parts, those are the ones that are good. And you know, some people just coach in places that you know, hey, just get the guys on the field and we're going to be okay. And that's fine too. But you know, I think it takes a little bit different coach to really be that relationship builder, you know. So
Well, you mentioned that we were teammates at a Division III school in Ohio.
Yeah.
And you know, as you know, you played football and then you went into coaching. Now you're working in the athletic performance area, strength and conditioning area. But was there stuff when you were an athlete that has made you a better coach now? You know, you had mentioned that you came, you know, let's say you walk on campus and everybody wants you because you big and strong and you can do all these lifts in the weight room, but maybe that didn't translate to performance. Was there, you know, has that kind of carried with you in terms of that's motivated you, or you see things a little bit differently than maybe if you hadn't had that experience as a player?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that probably was in the back of my brain because, and when I first got into coaching, I was your typical meathead guy. Like, I didn't want to be on the field sprinting and changing directions and things. I wanted to be in the weight room with the guys, throwing weight around. And then as I started to pursue my education and, you know, in to the human body and things along those lines, I said, whoa, that was what was wrong. I loved the weight room and didn't do, you know, enough when I was younger and didn't have anybody when I was young. Because in high school, when we walked in the weight room, there wasn't even if there was a coach in there, it was just to write something up on the board. And then they, you know, like we did hand us a bigger, faster, stronger sheet and, you know, whatever. And I look back now and my goal is to not to repeat those mistakes with our athletes. And, you know, man, I wish I would have trained from the age of 14 and 15 the way that we're doing with our athletes now. It would have made a big difference. But who knows? Was there anybody doing that in the 80s and early 90s? I don't know. You know, but that for sure kind of just was a, you know, when I started to be able to get experience in education and then have that thought in the back of my mind of what was wrong? Like, why could I, you know, why was I always getting fussed at for popping up? Well, because I had no mobility because all I did was lift weights. And, you know, when the athletic trainers say, you have the tightest hamstrings of any athlete we've ever seen. You know, I mean, why was that the case? Well, because that's what I trained for, you know? So yeah, definitely it has an influence on how I train the athletes now.
Well, in our same conference was a school called Mount Union. And a lot of people have probably heard of that in the coaching world or whatever. They've won, you know, how many Division III national titles have they won? It's crazy in football. But they won their first title when we were, I think when we were freshmen or sophomore, they won their first title in Division III. But you mentioned, was anybody doing it back then? You know, I wonder if they were doing it. You know, I wonder if they were at the cutting edge, and obviously we have no idea of what they were doing, you know, back then in the 80s and early 90s. But yeah, I imagine it's like anything, you know, those teams that were great were probably finding ways to do something that wasn't traditional.
Yeah. I think it's, if you can combine methods like that with the ability to have good athletes as well, now you're in a really strong position.
So let's say we all probably face this as a coach, even good coaches. We have an athlete, and let's say they're a pretty good athlete. They're the type of kid we want to get on the field or the court or the diamond or whatever, but they're not the easiest to coach. They're not very coachable. They're not very maybe motivated, or they're not like us maybe, or they're not like they should be. They're not very self-motivated. Maybe they're even selfish. And I know there's a lot, I just said a lot of different things, that there's different ways to solve those problems. But in general, are there some things that you've found when you're working with a challenging kid, a kid that's maybe not quite as coachable, to help them be a little bit better?
So my usual path with that is not to ridicule and not to, necessarily make a spectacle if at all possible. I think sometimes people think that public humiliation might change, but here's the thing. If they don't know why they should care, and that's probably the main reason, why should I care? Or it's a defense mechanism. I have recently had an athlete, when I asked him about his something that was going on in one of his times, and he said, coach, it's 10 o'clock in the morning. I just don't care that much at that time of the day. And, your gut instinct is to say, well, then you're going to be terrible, or, like ridicule him, when really we probably need to find, that's a defense mechanism right there. Do you think he really wants to say that and say, well, I'm not that slow, I just don't? No, it's a defense mechanism. So it all goes back to that relationship building. I mean, there's going to be a certain point, and I think that's harder for some coaches and easier for others, but there's going to be a certain point when you have to just tell an athlete, hey, stop working out, man. Like, you always will have my support, but you just don't have a role on our team. But I think that if you can dig down a little bit and build a little trust, it'll go a long way. And if they trust you, then they're going to listen to you. And then if they'll listen to you, then you can explain, hey, here is why you need to care. And, sometimes they just don't really want to be good. They're just like, hey, whatever. And it is what it is. But a lot of times you'll be able to flip that around. And, sometimes, like I said, I've had fantastic athletes over the years that just were never going to trust me, never going to buy into anything, just because they had too many voices outside the program, and things like that. But, for every one of those, there's probably at least 10 or 20 that maybe started out with a bad attitude, and you build a little bit of a relationship to the point where you can pull them aside and say, look, dude, I thought you said you wanted to be good at football. Oh, I do want to be good at football. Well, why aren't you listening? Do you trust me? I care about you. We have this relationship. Why don't you trust me? Oh, I trust you, coach. I trust you. Well, then what, and then it kind of, and I think that's the way to handle that, and just be willing to eventually say, hey, you have my support, but you just can't play on the football team or anymore. But before you get there, try to build that relationship. And so that's my thoughts on that.
Well, I have a 13-year-old, and he's constantly saying, back in my day. So I guess I say that way too much. Back in my day, or back when we were growing up, I don't remember anybody having a strength coach.
No.
Even in football, you might have 6 or 7 assistant coaches. None of them were the strength coach. There might be, the linebacker coach or the defensive coordinator that took that over, or whatever, someone that was their, they were stronger than the other coaches, so they did the weight room stuff. But
that's how I got into it.
Yeah, exactly. But and at some programs that's still the case. Some programs the coaches still have to handle that, but there's a lot more positions for strength and conditioning for athletic performance now. So if somebody listening to this wants to get into this field, or maybe has a son or a daughter or a friend that wants to get into this field, do you have some tips for getting into the strength and training, conditioning, the athletic performance area?
Yes. So I would say, if you're a college age athlete and you want to pursue that degree, make sure you get certified in physical education as well, because that's really the gold standard certification in the high school level, is the that PE degree, because there are some places that you can get a job without it, but most places are going to demand it one way or the other. If you are like myself, what I did was I just, in 2007 or 8, I was just the meathead football coach that was trying to learn. And one of our athletes' dad was a strength conditioning coach at Wake Forest, and I decided to visit him, and it changed my life. And just start going down rabbit holes and start to pursue, information. Even if you don't want to do a certification, there's so much information out there on how to be very competent in this field. But then, there's certifications, and certifications aren't the end all or be all, because, I got mine so late in life that I had already learned a lot of what I was going to learn from that certification. But it puts you into a community. I would join, if I was a parent or a high school coach, I would join the National High School Strength Coach Association. The networking is worth it. The networking is worth it. The access to people is worth it. Go back to school if you can. If you want to be the strength conditioning coach, then you need to set yourself apart in the building one way or the other as the expert. I've had this happen to me where I've had to say, look, you're the defensive line coach. I don't know what you know about coaching defensive line. You're the expert. Well, I'm the expert the school has recognized in this. And so we're going to defer to that. And you need to be able to say that, as opposed to just like, I won a bunch of games doing this. Who cares? Like, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. That could be because you have better kids. So, be growth minded, read, research, visit schools, meet people, get online and go to conferences. All of those things will kind of help you develop your own path, because I think that's another thing that leads to a qualified strength conditioning coach is, you might take bits and pieces of what other coaches do and build it into your program, but I know the why behind everything we do. So I'm putting out my own original material, even if it's borrowing from other places, because I know the why. I think sometimes less qualified might say, hey, here's what another school does, and they won games, so we're going to do this exactly. But they don't really know why. Be the guy or the girl that knows all the whys of everything that you plan to do. And then as you educate yourself, there will be a bigger and bigger toolbox of things that you know the why. And then, but my main point of advice is your toolbox should never be closed. Never think you've got it, because I learn things constantly. It might, every once in a while you'll have a game-changing thing, but most of the time it's just, oh, this is why we need to do this. This is why we need to do that. And the growth mindset, man, that's the number one thing.
Well, when you're talking about toolboxes, one of the best places to fill up your toolbox or to get more tools, is checking out SimpliFaster, SimpliFaster.com, or checking them out at Twitter at SimpliFaster. He's Mark Hoover. You can follow him on Twitter, Mark Hoover 71 at Mark Hoover 71. For everybody that's watched the show today or listened to the show, we thank you. Go out, follow Mark, follow SimpliFaster, check that out. Learn a little bit more about strength and conditioning, but definitely make sure that you're giving Mark a follow. But we thank you guys as well. Feel free to share this show with a friend, subscribe, hit the like button, the notification button, leave a little 5-star review, whatever you want to do. We appreciate that. But until next time, remember that success is a choice. What choice will you make today?